the esteemed President of the Vinci Institute, Professor Edward Kisveta, the Vice President, Professor Ben Anderson, and his wife, Nancy Ann, Mr. Marcello DeFranco, Head of Office of the High Commission of Canada, and Mr. Mike Morgan, the CEO, Southern Africa Canada Chamber of Commerce, Councillor Isaiah Engelbrecht, representatives from DTI, Mr. Jack van der Merwe, our 2018 laureate alumnus, and his wife Lizette, Mr. Samuel Isaacs, our 2019 laureate recipient, and his son Joshua, industry guests, the Da Vinci Council members, colleagues, faculty, supervisors, the media, partners, family, and of course the people we are here to celebrate tonight, our PhD candidates, whom we really do honor for your incredible achievements. All protocol observed. Good evening and welcome to the 2019 President's Dinner of the Da Vinci Institute. They say that a true leader has the confidence to stand alone, the courage to make very tough decisions, and the compassion to listen to the needs of others. He does not ever set out to actually be a leader, but becomes one by the equality of his actions and the integrity of his intent. No truer words can be said of our first speaker, your host this evening, our Honourable President of the Da Vinci Institute and the Commissioner of the South African Revenue Services, Professor Edward Kisveta, who I call up to welcome you this evening. Thank you.
A very hearty good evening to all of you. I just rushed out of one of the studios where I've had an interview, so I am totally unprepared for what I'm going to say now. So don't hold me accountable. But, you know, tonight is an important event where we celebrate those who have reached the pinnacle of their academic journey and whom tomorrow will be recognized with their doctoral degrees. And that's really a long-standing tradition that has come about under the leadership of Professor Ben Anderson, who inspired this event, so that we could just pause and take a moment and reflect. Tomorrow I will unfortunately not be there. I have a small office in Pretoria that needs me. Tomorrow I work for a little company in Brooklyn, and they need my services tomorrow, so I apologize for not being there. I think it's the first event that I won't be for a number of years. But the key message that I want to share with you is this morning I was the keynote at an event where I was invited to talk about leadership, and reflecting that throughout the world we currently experience a dearth of leadership, a leadership deficiency, a leadership crisis, as it is. Now, I don't know whether it's good or bad that we're in global company in this regard, but we find this across the world. We find a new brand of political leadership that is based on strong man, divisive politics, seeking to amplify our differences, our us versus our them, rather than looking for that which is common amongst us, that which unites us. And sadly, they do this in the name of the collective good, but really masks this collective good narrative, masking their own pursuit of narrow self-interest. And that's sad, because we look to political leadership for the courage to face a very disruptive and uncertain future. But political leaders themselves are not the only ones that must carry the burden of the leadership crisis. In South Africa and around the world, but let me focus on South Africa for a moment, we have a number of failures that are branded as leadership failures. Whether we talk about the levels of corruption that we have seen in the state entities, or whether we find corporate failures that we have seen in the last while. Every single one of them can be branded as a leadership failure first. And it's useful to remind ourselves that all of this took place under the watchful eye of expensive international consultants, purportedly credible providers of assurance, audit firms, and preparers of tax returns that somehow have lost the true purpose that they ought to serve, and again reduce their work to the narrowest of self-interest, often just short-term gain. And so it's appropriate that in reflecting on those who have and will tomorrow be accredited with leadership in the academic sphere, that we really take up the leadership role that begins to imagine, that begins to not just provide thought leadership, but also begin to practice what we believe the brand of leadership is that the world needs right now. And my own sense, it is that we need a sense of stewardship. Marla spoke about leadership that is not about self-service, but it's about service to others. Robert Greenleaf says that those who set out because they have this incessant desire to serve and then find themselves in a position where they lead. And for those in the room who are not privileged to be awarded with a PhD tomorrow, don't wait for your doctoral thesis to be completed. It may never be there. Wherever you are, whether it is in your home, in your community, in your place of work, let us step up to the level of leadership we expect of others. Let us not wait on them, but let us begin to model the leadership that we expect. Because unless each of us make this our own challenge, the crisis of leadership will simply continue. I'd like to end my welcome to you this evening by sharing with you another phenomena that deeply troubles and deeply saddens me. And this is the fact that simply being a woman or a child in South Africa is to be at risk of being abused by a man. Last week I expressed my position in a letter to our staff that says, as men, we need to own up. We need to stand up and we need to speak out. We are too silent on this matter. We are culprits. We are guilty. Because whether we point our finger to another man, actually, we all carry the burden of a patriarchal society that somehow in one or other way we entrench. And so I think it is time for us to stand up and to speak out, but also to begin to act in a way that shows the level of respect, the level of care, and to create a society where our women, our children can feel safe. They deserve no less than that. And so the challenge to all of us as men is, what are we doing to begin to become activists, to have more boldly and more frankly the conversation about our own behavior that often lacks the kind of integrity that is required? What example are we setting for our own boys so that they can grow up and understand what it means to be a man, a true man, and not a bully? And so I thought I would share that with you and pause for a moment. There are many women in the room tonight, and all of you, you need to know that you deserve a better South Africa, and we need to work harder to create the South Africa you deserve. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. I told you he's always warm, welcoming, and inspiring. Maya Angelou once said that I've learned that people will forget what you said, and people will also forget what you did, but they will never, ever forget the way that you make them feel. And Prof, you have a remarkable way of always making people feel listened to, heard, inspired, motivated, and guided by your enchanting leadership style. It begs no question as to why you are one of South Africa's most influential, lauded, and powerful leaders. And so we forgive you for not being at the graduation tomorrow, since you do have an important job to take care of our country. Tonight we have a supervisor that is going to deliver a message. And I always think that the role of a supervisor for a doctoral student is an incredible relationship that people bear. Dr. Andries van der Linde holds a PhD in electrical engineering. He's got 50 years work experience, of which 40 of those years have been in higher education. In his impressive career, he's been awarded multiple awards. He enjoys professional registration with HEQC and is a registered electrician. He's also an NRF-rated researcher, which for those of you that are in the field will know how difficult that is. And he's been awarded multiple research grants, in particular for his work on renewable energy, which is really an important aspect in our country. Dr. van der Linde has extensive supervision and publication experience, with 57 publications to his name, of which 42 of those are in international journals and 15 in local journals. It gives me great pleasure to call up Dr. van der Linde to deliver the supervisor message this evening.
Professor Kisvetter came here and he made an apology for not being prepared, and then he goes ahead and he nullifies that by being a superlative natural speaker. As a scientist, we are good at presentations, but speaking is a different story. So, so at any rate, let's go from there. As I reflected on this talk, I was struck by the depth of what's being achieved by our students at this unique and different, see what I mean? As I reflected on this talk, I was struck by the depth of what's being achieved by our students at this unique institution and the difference they make from a professional perspective. As you know, there's very little that's new under the sun. In the past, we invented and discovered. Now we're in an era where we search for deeper understanding while expanding our knowledge base to improve what we have for transdisciplinary application for the benefit of all. What an exciting journey for our students, knowing that they will make a real difference, and what a difference it is to be part of that journey. However, it's not easy. It takes hard work and dedication. I would say a marathon in academic excellence. Just to understand and formulate the problem to be resolved is a task of its own. You would think it's just simple, but it's not. It can happen that full clarity can only be achieved after a bulk of the work is being done. This is not fundamental research, which is typically one-dimensional. We, together with our students, we deal with complex issues. That is all part of and parcel of the challenge of the developmental process we as student supervisor teams relish. We really enjoy that. The nature of Mode 2 research is such that it enriches, grows, and develops our students on a professional level, resulting in an ultimate conclusion which not only benefits the employer, but society, the country, and at times, the world as a whole. A further curveball is the transdisciplinary aspect, where we interrogate and tease out literature, data, and results. At times, we frustrate each other. You can ask Cammy here. We've been at each other, frustrated, but we come to a conclusion eventually. And we don't just look around for a round peg that fits perfectly in one hole. That's not good enough. We invent the flexible peg. Why? Because recommendations emanating from the conclusions arrived at needs to be relevant on a wider level. How relevant? This relevance makes all the difference in terms of application in our industry, our country, and even the potential to take it abroad. There should be no limit. I look forward to the oral exams. I enjoy it. And the reason for it is because that's where all is packed out in abbreviated form. That is a thesis in a minute, or actually a couple of minutes. For the students, it feels like hours. In this compact version of their thesis, one can easily follow that golden thread. I always talk about the golden thread. Remember the golden thread that's got to follow throughout. And to me, the highlight is the potential impact in terms of society and the economy. I find that students, until this point, underestimate what they do and what they achieve and how significant the impact would become. I still have to sit in on an oral exam without that wow factor appearing. To me, it's that oral exam is the highlight of the whole journey. You, our students, you make a difference. I congratulate you and stand proud to be counted among your supervisors and to be a Da Vinci staff member as I reflect on each of these wonderful, enriching journeys. I thank you for being part of it.
Thank you, Dr. van der Linde. I think you underestimate your own skills, but hearing you speak makes me think of my favorite analogy about research, and this one's for you, Prof. Ben. Research is formalized curiosity. It is poking and prying with a purpose. Curiosity ensures we never stop asking questions. And we hope that each of you, as students, supervisors, and citizens of this country, will continue to probe and consider questions that could contribute to the body of knowledge to influence sustainable and transformational ecosystems. We also would like to invite you to co-create in publishing with us, because publication and through research publication, that is really how we disseminate some of the body of knowledge. And I don't want to leave you hungry, so we will now serve starters before our next speakers. I can see Tony there is very hungry. And you'll be entertained by our incredible opera singers as you enjoy your starter.
This is the moment, this is the day, when I send all my doubts and demons on the way.
Every endeavor I have made ever is coming into play, is here and now today. This is the time when the momentum and the moment are in rhyme. Give me this moment, this precious chance. I'll gather up my past and make some sense at last. This is the moment when I
Thank you. Thank you.
Our student speaker this evening began his career in electrical engineering, working on the mines in South Africa. So it seems like we've definitely got the scientists in the house tonight. After completing his MSc in mineral economics in the late 90s, he was transferred to Anglo-American head office as a project manager to develop projects in West and East Africa, North and South America, Australia, and project studies in Russia. During this phase, he held director positions in Anglo's subsidiary, companies registered in West and East Africa, as well as in Southwest Africa at the time. In 2008, Peter joined a project company as the head of projects and managed project teams that developed deep-level mining projects with infrastructure and mineral processing plants. Currently, Peter is working on projects in the DRC, project studies in Russia, and a project study in America. So definitely very ambitious, and then he's also supervising multiple project managers. So I'm not quite sure where he found the time to actually complete his PhD, but in 2013, Peter, with the support of his wife of 37 years, their 3 boys and 7 grandkids, decided that it was actually time to brave the frontiers of tackling a PhD, to develop a scorecard for assessing project complexity. It gives me great pleasure that he has succeeded in this very bold ambition and that he can stand here this evening as our student speaker. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome soon-to-be Dr. Peter Lowe.
I was asked to just express tonight my views on how I experienced the Mode 1 and the Mode 2 setup in terms of the institutions where I completed my studies. Now, Doreen and I, we both grew up in the Western Transvaal, in what they used to call the shadow of the headgear, because all our dads, both our dads, worked on the mines, and we were surrounded by these steel and concrete headgears. So my first field of study after leaving school was electrical engineering. And obviously, I joined the mines after that, and I've never looked back. Mines have treated us very well. The companies that we worked for have treated us very well, and we've come a long way in terms of this whole process. So, but working in engineering, I also had to manage certain projects. And managing projects on mines, I found that often managing the project teams, I needed to know more about the people in the team. And not so much the people in the team, but the disciplines of the people in the team. Because we started off with survey, geology, mining, and I was an electrical engineer. So eventually, after a number of years, I opted to do an MSc in mineral economics. And there was my sort of step into the Mode 1, where the lecturers that I had at the time were, after university, they had a lot of organizational and practical experience on the mines or wherever they worked, and then later returned back to the university to lecture. But lecture in the specific field that they actually worked in. So they tended to change into true academics, in my view. And the institution and environment that they worked in, they developed into these academics, and they focused on solving problems in their field. The interaction with the outside organizations was through the students and the students from these organizations that they taught. My research was directed to use new knowledge that I gained from the lectures that they presented and to solve a problem. And that would mainly benefit that specific field in which the research was done. And then the methodology employed was considered acceptable if the prescribed methodology was followed It was reviewed with the academic literature and socialized. The information was socialized by consulting with the academics. If I did not at that time consult with the academics, my research wouldn't have been considered as valid. Now, this was my experience of a Mode 1 institution. And postgrad research, it was really scientific focused, and the quality control was defined by the scientific community. Now, after 1994, mining projects outside South Africa and in Africa became extremely attractive to the big mining corporates. And I then transferred to head office in Johannesburg, and here I started managing projects in Africa, and later in projects in other countries and on different continents of the world. This was my University of Client Project Management experience. I was then in 2008 enticed to move to an EPCM company, project company, engineering, procurement, construction management project house. And I joined them as their project delivery officer. First of all, I thought it was a very weird title, but it was an executive position, no less. Yeah, actually, in my mind and view, I joined the university of working in a construction project management company to build construction project management experience. And also at the time, leading the project teams that were working in certain parts of the world. I was exposed to projects that were well executed and delivered what they promised to deliver or intended to deliver. But then also there were projects that went horribly wrong. And it wasn't due to a lack of methodology or framework. It was because all the projects followed exactly the same methodology, exactly the same framework. It was just what was the level of uncertainty that people had to deal with. And it's this uncertainty that actually drove me to think about project complexity and learn about project complexity. So the uncertainty that I came across then led me to identify, and a year identified the gap between traditional project management and complex project management. And that's what my PhD is about, trying to close this gap, or wanting to close this gap, or actually have closed this gap. And I developed a scorecard for assessing project complexity. Now, at the same time, Eskom also started building new power stations. And they, at the time, presented a colloquium in Midrand, 3-day project management colloquium in Midrand, and Vinci had a display outside one of these venues. So, and I recall, and I think it was Sushi that actually introduced me to it and told me about the Mode 2 concept. And I really didn't know what a Mode 2 concept was. So I took the prospectus, I read it, and I looked at it and I discovered that it could actually produce knowledge from research by interacting with organizations and practitioners. And I could, with this, actually close that gap between traditional project management and complex project management. But the big important thing for me is that finishing my PhD, I want to give back to the project management body of knowledge. And Mode 2 was collaborative, interactive, and transdisciplinary. And it was a way to socialize how this knowledge will be used going forward. This was different to the Mode 1 that was academic-based and controlled. The Mode 2 environment allowed me to collect information that evolved over time as time went on. And this developed into new knowledge through the literature research, the interactions and collaborations with people in organizations, institutions, and academia. From the Vinci side, they ensured that I stayed on track. They maintained the quality of my research through supervisor reviews to validate and apply rigor. It allowed me to work with organizations, academics and practitioners while doing research in my work environment. The Mode 2 demanded discipline yet to stay on track. And it allowed me to develop knowledge and produce an outcome that closed the gap and added new knowledge to the project management body of knowledge. So in summary, considering Mode 2 and comparing it to Mode 1, Mode 2 was a different style to produce knowledge. It was interactive and related to application. It developed knowledge for application, and it was joint knowledge production with academic research and knowledge produced with practitioners. It was corroborative, integrative, and transdisciplinary within the social environment on how that knowledge will be used going forward. Mode 1 versus that was academic discipline-based and controlled. And forgive me for saying this, but in my mind, Mode 2 has moved beyond the Mode 1 way of producing and sharing knowledge. It's just my experience and the way I experienced it. However, the Mode 2 research needs quality control during this research. And this in the hands of the institution, this is in the hands of the institution that oversees the research and the student. Da Vinci was good in appointing supervisors and to oversee this process to ensure that the quality of new knowledge produced would stand the scrutiny when it was judged. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Now, if you know Prof. Ben, you'll know he's hard to please when it comes to people's explanations of Mode 2. So I asked him now, I said, Peter really gets this, and so Peter, it's a huge compliment if Prof. Ben says you really get it. So I think that's an incredible testament to the brand ambassador for Da Vinci that you are, and for us as an institute to know that that has had a meaningful contribution in your life. Albert Einstein once said that if I had an hour to solve a problem and my life really did depend on it, I would use the first 55 minutes determining the proper question to ask. I'm sure every one of you that has been a doctoral candidate, because I know I feel this way, that those 55 minutes are more like 5 years. But it does really emphasize the importance of the engagement that every single one of you has had in ensuring that the problems that you've undertaken in your research and the questions you asked were both meaningful and purposeful. And we really do hope that studying in a Mode 2 environment, such as Da Vinci, has taught you to actually probe problems and to question things in a very unique manner. Because besides all the transdisciplinary nature and those aspects, probing things differently and doing things uniquely is also something that we want to encourage in students. And so we thank you so much, Peter, for being this ambassador for us, and we look forward to seeing you publishing off of your PhD. Our keynote speaker, it seems that we've definitely got incredible speakers tonight, because Ndemiso Hadebe is an award-winning economist. He's a global speaker and a business strategist. He's a well-versed orator, having enthused audiences in the United States, in Paris, in China, and in the Netherlands. Ndemiso is an invaluable resource to organizations with his extensive experience. He's a contributing author of a book titled Reflections on South Africa, the foreword of which was written by the presidency in the Republic of South Africa. He is an academic and a critical thinker who contributes to multiple tertiary institutions in varied capacities. He is also the winner of Africa's most contested leadership debate show on SABC1. He's a judge for season 7 of One Day Leader, also on SABC1, and an ambassador for South Africa's national brand, Brand South Africa. So when he's not being a movie star, he is a renowned economist and business strategist and a regular contributor in this role on broadcasting platforms such as CNBC Africa, Talk Radio 702, Kai FM, and Power FM. His accolades are extensive, and so I won't go through the whole list, but I'll just give you some of the ones that excited me. And that is that he was a national finalist in the Anglo-American and the Soweto Young Communicators Awards and the United Nations Model Debate. He's represented South Africa at UNESCO as a speaker. He's a sought-after thought leader. Ndumiso has delivered his own TED Talk presentation with one of the highest views of any South African speaker, and I was definitely one of them. He received the Gauteng Premier's Certificate of Excellence and the Sedibeng District Mayor Medal. And for his outstanding contribution in the areas of investment, promotion, facilitation, and aftercare is where he's received his awards. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you our absolute dynamo and esteemed guest speaker, Ndumise Hadebe.
Thank you very much for that very illustrious introduction. The former president, President Kgalema Motlanthe, whenever people read his profile, as it were, he says he cringes because it almost sounds as if they're reading his obituary. And so I would hope that I still have a couple of years ahead of me before that is the case. But thank you so much for that illustrious introduction. If you may allow me. I'll leave it there. And so in classical millennial fashion, I played that song with my smartphone from my Instagram account. But I think the musical icon that is Johnny Clegg, the late Johnny Clegg, he wrote this specific song, Asimbonang Mandela, which basically means we have not seen Mandela and yet we see him, in memory of him and in tribute to him. In 1986, when South Africa had declared a state of emergency, during a time of great turmoil in South Africa. At that point, it was 24 years when nobody had seen Madiba's voice, or nobody had heard Madiba's voice, or seen Madiba's face. And yet, he used the powerful instrument that is music to remind South Africans of the hope that he represents and that he embodies in the creation of a new society, a peaceful society, a stable society, and a prosperous one. And for those reasons, when reflecting about what to say here this evening, and in acknowledging the excellent achievement of the PhD candidates that bring us together here this evening, I was reminded of the significance of memories, of inquiry, and of reflection in the creation of a society that is embedded in a spirit of excellence that uMadiba represented. But perhaps some folks might say I am being overly sentimental about the issue of memories and reflection and critical inquiry. Much like perhaps Socrates' friend, Callicles, who was trying to talk Socrates out of philosophizing too much about issues, in a dialogue that is titled The Gorgias. So Callicles says this to his friend Socrates, that philosophy is a very pretty tool, is a very pretty toy, if one indulges in it with moderation at the right time of life. But if one pursues it further than one should, it becomes an absolute ruin. Take my advice, Callicles says, abandon argument, open yourself up to the accomplishments of active life. Take for your models not those who spend their days on these pretty quibbles, but those who have a good livelihood and reputation and many other blessings. So Callicles is really saying to Socrates, quit philosophizing, get real, go to business school. And he did have a point, because philosophy does distance us from conventions and oftentimes settled beliefs. Then another author, by the name of Advocate Tembeka Ncukaitobi, said this about memories. Countries are built by bricks and mortar. Buildings, roads, houses, railway lines, airports, and harbors are symbols of the existence of countries. The bigger they are, the better the country. So, countries strive for the dominance of the world to create bigger airports, bigger stadia, and bigger shopping malls. Societies, however, are different. The link from one generation to the next is passed down by word of mouth. In the modern world, those linkages are passed down in the written form. So books of history, books of science, books of language are instruments to connect us to a world we have never inhabited. They connect us to people we have never met, places we have never seen, and a culture we can only imagine. But the path to creating a society lives and only survives through memory. Memory is not confined to a generation, to personal experiences, and to a single lived reality. Memory is cross-generational, it is interpersonal, and it is the ability to transport and transpose one reality to the next. Stories of the past help us not only to know how our predecessors lived, but how they shaped out our own living. Memory teaches us how to be. Without memory, we might have a country, but we would certainly not have a society. And so with this reflection on the importance of using memories, and I would assume the PhD candidates that bring us here today, you had to undergo a very difficult journey of critical inquiry, deep reflection, and at times use memories that drove you to undertake this journey that you will be recognized for tomorrow, as it were. And I would hope that you would not only use the experience that you've had for your own personal development or that of your families, but that of this beautiful country of ours. Asimbonango Mandela. Thank you.
Ndemiso, I think that's more meaningful than you even realize, because Johnny Clegg was actually our 2016 laureate alumnus. So for our institute, it was a huge loss as well from that perspective. Thank you for really inspiring us with your words. And it said that that attitudes are actually contagious. And if that is the case, yours is definitely one worth catching, that's for sure. A long time ago, someone who sacrificed their sleep, their family, their food, their laughter, and basically all joys of life were actually called saints. Today, they're called PhD candidates. But on a more serious note, tomorrow as you graduate, I would really like you to remember one thing, that you are only one of 12% of PhD candidates who begin their journey at universities in South Africa that stand where you will stand tomorrow. And I really think that that is an incredible feat, and to try to think about that, only 12%. This shows your determination, your endurance, and your absolutely momentous achievement that we are here tonight to celebrate. I now introduce you to a man who knows all too well the journey you've walked, not only because he's walked it himself, but he's supervised and published over 100 times. I think Prof, it's well over 100 times. So the Vice Principal of the Vinci Institute, Professor Krishna Govender, will come up and introduce our PhD students.
Thank you, Marla. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to call to the podium the following PhD candidates. I think I'm not going to give a speech. Marla has sketched it, and the previous speakers, in fact, the student representative, Peter Lowe, has said it all in terms of the journey they have gone through in arriving at this position. And what is most important is that I think they emphasize the value of research. Because, as Mala said, we all have done lots of research, but how much of that was translated to advancing society? I think, Peter, you sketched it in terms of your personal advancement, in terms of return on investment that you received, in terms of what this whole journey has taught you. And I'm hoping that we have 5 tonight or 5 tomorrow, we will make a little dent in terms of advancing society and advancing communities. Without much ado, I'd like to call upon the following candidates. The first candidate is Alabadi Samir Ode Hilal. Samir's thesis was Alternate Dispute Resolution, an Islamic Approach to Justice, Arbitration, and Reconciliation. Our next candidate is Lau Peter Johannes. The next candidate is Martins Justin Grant. The next is Motlomiane Mpo Jeffrey. The next is Kamarchi Yang.
Thank you, Prof. So this evening's formalities are being closed off by a man who certainly needs no introduction in the Da Vinci community. A man who epitomizes what we speak of as the Da Vinci dream of influencing the co-creation of sustainable societies in the most authentic way. And I think for me, the thing about Prof. Ben is that he exists within a cooperative reality that I've never really seen other people exist in before, and he has this innate ability to co-create with individuals from all echelons of life and society. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to call on the CEO and the principal of the Da Vinci Institute, Professor Ben Anderson.
So I don't want to say too much tonight, but I want to think of a PhD in an analogy as being a crisis. So if you think of crises, somebody asked me, what do I define as a PhD? Well, I think it's a set of evolutionary events over a period of time that creates a crisis. So there's something in your life, and was in my life when I took that journey, that contributed into you ultimately really taking that challenge and that opportunity to do a PhD or a doctorate. Now, if you look at the explanation of the word crisis, there are many descriptions that come up. Some of them say it's to separate. It can also be to decide. Although I must say of late, I am examining some PhDs which I'm not sure there was any decision taken. It can also mean to draw a distinction between things, but important, it can also be a turning point and a moment of truth. So I always wonder, sitting here and sometimes sitting at the oral defenses, to what extent has your PhD been a crisis? Does it have the mix of decision and that turmoil of deciding what to do and to separate certain things to get focus? and to ultimately draw the distinction. This morning when I had the interviews with the PhD candidates, the critical thing that I was looking for is, have you drawn the distinction? What is that unique voice that emerged because of your engagement in this pathway? Now, it's interesting, I thought, if you think of crises, we can think of the UK, if we just take it a little bit away from us. The UK was, we would say, is in a crisis. In 2017, they decide to leave the EU. But it was just yesterday, in 1973, when they agreed to join the European Union. But it's a crisis today. But if you really unpack it, you would see that development of decisions or development of activities over time, evolutionary so in some way, that brought them to the crisis. I really wish they can make a decision, because in a way I find it very interesting that society has made a decision, but there's an interesting layer, they call it politicians, that seem not to know how to make the decision. But they've got a crisis. They have to make a distinction. They have to draw the line. They have to draw the distinction. If you think of the Roman Empire, in 500 before Christ, if I may use that as a reference, the rise of the Roman Empire started. But about 200, 250 years later, in about 200 and 250 before Christ, we had the two Carthaginian wars, Carthago wars. And then in about another 150 years later, in the Roman Empire's history, we see in about 20 BC the change from the republican government to that of the empire. And then about 400 years later, we see the fall of the Roman Empire. Now the fall of the empire in 500 after Christ, a full 1,000 years, was a crisis to what was Roman. But they had to draw a distinction, they had to make a decision. It was a turning point. So the fact that the Roman Empire does not exist today doesn't mean what was in the Roman Empire and that was of the Roman Empire has all been lost. A lot of what you and I do today is still of the Roman Empire. If you go to the loo, that comes from the Roman Empire. So not all that is involved in crisis needs to be bad. Now the same applies for me back to the PhD. As much as it's a crisis that you can determine, and many people say people get divorced, people make life changes, for some it's not a good experience. We hope at Vinci that we will continue improving in making it a very meaningful and remarkable experience. But it's still a crisis. It's a crisis for every one of you tonight as a PhD graduate. What are you going to decide? What is captured in your thesis and in your mind that will make this a turning point? I hope to see as our alumni that each of you will share with us the turning point that this crisis brought you to. And with those, I want to say congratulations, and we're looking forward tomorrow to award you your qualifications. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I think, Prof. Ben, one of the things about you that I admire most is your authenticity around robust debate. So one of the things that Da Vinci really tries to embed in people is to have a voice. And I think through, Prof. Ben likes to refer to it as, I'll tease you a little bit, and really those teasings can turn into quite robust debate. But I think from that perspective, we hope as Da Vinci ambassadors that you always let your voice be heard in the most remarkable way. And we look forward to continuing with you on our journey alongside you as now not only Da Vinci students, but now as Da Vinci alumnus. And from our side, that's the new relationship that we look forward to co-creating with you. Because in closing, that concept of co-creation that is so systemic within Da Vinci is really about all of us creating and recreating reality on a continual basis. And every single time that a person comes into your reality, you are co-creating a new reality with that person at a given time. So we hope that we've co-created with you as students, and now that we will have that exact same experience in a completely different way, if that makes sense, as co-creating with you as alumnus of our institution. I also look forward to seeing you tomorrow on stage, and we hope that you'll enjoy the rest of the evening, having some singing, dancing, enjoying yourselves with your families. Thank you very much, and travel safely home.
Without